In an industry where egos often clash quietly behind closed doors, the Stone Woods dynamic was front and center, drawing fascination and fatigue from everyone around them. Both Stone and Woods were known for their impressive intellects and unwavering commitment to their craft. Stone approached her characters with layered psychology, drawing from extensive backstory research and a strong understanding of dramatic structure. Woods, for his part, brought a razor-sharp mind and famously intense preparation style, often arriving on set with detailed notes and multiple interpretations of every scene. When the two were cast opposite one another, sparks were inevitable. But instead of creating creative synergy, their shared intensity often turned into competitive friction. Producer David Brown summed up their working relationship best when he described it as a chess match of egos. To him, watching Stone and Woods prepare for scenes was like observing two grandmasters, brilliant, strategic, and constantly probing for the upper hand. They weren't just acting, he explained. They were battling over whose vision would define the moment. This dynamic made every table read an event in itself, with each actor pushing to out-analyze the other. Script coordinator Patricia Williams recalled how every script meeting felt like a graduate seminar in dramatic theory. They'd arrive with pages of notes, not just on their lines, but on scene structure, subtext, even dialogue rhythms, she said. What began as thoughtful discussions often turned into long debates over motivation, meaning, and authorial intent. They were so focused on winning the argument that they sometimes forgot the goal was to tell a cohesive story. Williams added, "This wasn't a case of one-upmanship for the sake of ego alone. Both actors genuinely believed in their respective visions, but their shared tendency to dominate the creative space made collaboration incredibly difficult, especially for the directors tasked with guiding them. One such director described the experience as simultaneously thrilling and maddening. Every scene had to be negotiated, and compromises were hard-won." Cinematographer Robert Richardson, who worked with both on one of their joint projects, observed that both Sharon and James needed to be the smartest person in the room, which made collaboration nearly impossible. For Richardson, lighting and framing a scene became secondary to managing the energy between two actors constantly circling each other like intellectual predators. Even their off-camera interactions carried the same mix of admiration and tension. Crew members noted that while Stone and Woods clearly respected one another, there was no warmth in their relationship, only a simmering acknowledgement that they were each battling an equal. Their shared scenes crackled with authenticity because, behind the performances, there was real emotional heat driven by mutual ambition and fierce dedication to their craft. Despite the challenges, their collaborations yielded some of the most compelling moments in each actor's career. In films like Casino and The Specialist, the scenes they shared were electric, not just because of the script, but because of the underlying tension between two artists unwilling to compromise. Stone's refusal to bend to Woods' aggressive interpretations and Woods' equally stubborn insistence on his vision created a dynamic that was as captivating as it was explosive. Leonardo DiCaprio, the 1995 Western, The Quick and the Dead, brought together two stars at very different points in their careers. Sharon Stone, an established force in Hollywood, and Leonardo DiCaprio, a rapidly rising talent whose youthful charm had made him a standout, but whose approach to acting was still developing. Their collaboration, while polite on the surface, revealed a subtle but persistent clash of expectations, work ethics, and generational values. Stone wasn't just the film's lead, she was also one of its producers. Her dual role gave her considerable authority on set, and she approached her responsibilities with a careful sense of discipline. For Stone, portraying the mysterious and vengeful gunslinger Ellen wasn't just about showing up and looking tough. It was about crafting a fully realized character, shaped by a lifetime of trauma, moral ambiguity, and quiet strength. She arrived on set every day with exhaustive preparation, having constructed a detailed emotional and psychological profile for Ellen that guided every line delivery and gesture. DiCaprio, in contrast, was just 20 years old and still riding the early wave of his stardom. Fresh off of What's Eating Gilbert Grape, for which he had received an Oscar nomination, DiCaprio was already turning heads in the industry. But his approach was rooted more in natural instincts and youthful spontaneity than in deep method. Preparation. He played the Kid, a cocky young gunslinger with something to prove, a character not unlike his own position in Hollywood at the time. Director Sam Raimi watched the dynamic between the two unfold with curiosity. Sharon treated every scene like it was Shakespeare, he told Entertainment Weekly, while Leo had this natural, effortless quality that didn't require her level of intensive preparation. Raimi admired both styles, but the difference between them became especially apparent during rehearsals. Stone, ever the craftsperson, sought deep discussions about character motivation and emotional subtext. She expected her scene partners, no matter their age or experience, to meet her at the meter. Same level of dedication got, but DiCaprio often viewed such conversations as excessive or unnecessary. According to assistant director James Cresson, Sharon tried to engage Leo in deep conversations about his character's psychological motivations, while he seemed more interested in perfecting his quick-draw techniques. For him, the swagger and physicality of the role were more central than the internal monologue. This mismatch created a dynamic that flirted with a mentor-student relationship, though it wasn't one DiCaprio actively sought. Stone's efforts to guide and challenge him came from a place of professionalism, but to DiCaprio, they sometimes felt like overreach. The more she pushed for intense character work, the more he leaned into his improvisational instincts. Cast members took notice of the tension, which never erupted into outright conflict, but lingered just below the surface, a constant push and pull of experience versus ease. Stone's frustration eventually bubbled into quiet commentary. According to costume designer Judiana Makovsky, Stone voiced her concerns about young actors who hadn't yet learned to earn respect through dedication to craft rather than relying solely on natural talent. While she acknowledged DiCaprio's undeniable charisma and screen presence, she longed for him and others like him to understand that true mastery of the art required more than instinct. Despite their differences, both actors delivered memorable performances. Stone brought gravitas and sorrow to Ellen's vengeance-fueled journey, while DiCaprio gave the Kid a reckless energy that made him unforgettable. Ironically, the very tension that existed off-screen may have enhanced their on-screen dynamic. Ellen's seasoned stoicism playing against the Kid's impulsive bravado. Michael Douglas, the collaboration between Sharon Stone and Michael Douglas in Basic Instinct may have scorched the screen with its steamy tension and suspense. But behind the scenes, that same fire was fueled by clashing egos, creative ideologies, and power dynamics that would define and divide the production. Douglas came into the film not just as the male lead, but also as a co-producer, carrying with him the weight and influence of an established Hollywood power player. He was used to having control, used to his voice being the loudest in the room. Stone, on the other hand, had everything to prove. She was not yet a major star, but she wasn't going to be a passive participant in someone else's vision either. Her commitment to the role of Catherine Trammell was fierce, cerebral, and deeply personal. She brought with her an analytical intensity that demanded to be heard, whether or not her scene partner, director, or the studio was ready for it. Director Paul Verhoeven found himself navigating a precarious creative balance. Sharon brought an intellectual rigor to every scene that sometimes clashed with Michael's more instinctive producer mentality. He reflected years later in film comment. For Verhoeven, the push-pull between these two leads, one prioritizing psychological depth and thematic complexity, the other focused on narrative propulsion and box office viability, wasn't a nuisance. It was a crucible. It forged the film's bold tone, riding the razor's edge between exploitation and art. The most intense battles revolved around the film's now infamous intimate scenes. Stone did not see them as simple titillation, but as essential layers to her character's psychological makeup. She demanded creative input, often engaging in intense debates over Catherine's motivations and emotional undertones. Douglas, accustomed to actors executing rather than influencing, saw this as overreach. According to cinematographer Jan de Bont, she wouldn't just perform the role, she wanted to co-create it. This made every shoot day a high-stakes affair, particularly during sequences that called for emotional and physical vulnerability. Douglas sought efficiency and control. Stone pushed for exploration and authenticity. Their creative differences weren't confined to individual scenes. Stone saw Basic Instinct as an allegory of female power. Catherine wasn't just a seductive mystery. She was a symbol for control, a woman who weaponized her intelligence and sexuality in a male-dominated world. Douglas, by contrast, viewed the film through the lens of a mainstream thriller designed to entertain and titillate rather than provoke existential questions. Their different visions clashed constantly and visibly. The tension bled into the energy of the film itself, lending their on-screen dynamic a genuine unpredictability. Every scene crackled with the unspoken knowledge that these characters, like the actors playing them, were locked in a psychological duel for dominance. The lines between performance and reality blurred. For Stone, the experience was illuminating, if draining. In one of her most pointed remarks about the production, she summarized it this way: "Working with someone who confuses authority with artistry teaches you the difference between being powerful and being right." It was a quiet dagger aimed at the Hollywood establishment and likely at Douglas himself. Robert De Niro, the collaboration between Sharon Stone and Robert De Niro in Martin. Scorsese's Casino was a landmark pairing of two powerhouse performers, both celebrated for their commitment to authenticity, but with very different philosophies about how to get there. What unfolded behind the scenes was not so much a clash of egos, but rather a clash of methods. As two devoted actors navigated the space between deep preparation and raw spontaneity, Stone, known for her cerebral, preparation-heavy process, threw herself into the role of Ginger McKenna, the glamorous, emotionally volatile hustler who marries De Niro's Ace Rothstein, a meticulous mob associate running a Las Vegas casino. She arrived on set with notebooks full of research, detailed psychological profiles, and scene-by-scene emotional roadmaps. For her, Ginger was a character who had to be carefully constructed from the inside out, each emotional beat supported by motivation, trauma, and background. De Niro, meanwhile, embodied a more instinctual, experiential version of method acting. Rather than talk about motivations or analyze lines beforehand, he preferred to discover his character through repeated takes and organic reactions in the moment. It was an approach that had served him well for decades, from Taxi Driver to Raging Bull. With Scorsese at the helm, De Niro trusted that emotional truth would emerge naturally, not through preparation, but through presence. Director Martin Scorsese, known for fostering rich actor-driven performances, found himself mediating two different acting languages. They had creative differences in achieving truthful performance. He later said in film comment, a diplomatic way of describing the ongoing push and pull that unfolded throughout production. He valued both actors' approaches, but it required constant balancing to ensure one method didn't overpower the other. Attention became particularly visible during the film's domestic scenes, which were emotionally fraught and central to the film's character arc. Stone wanted to explore the psychological underpinnings of Ginger's erratic behavior, the root of her manipulations, and the slow unraveling of her marriage. She believed these scenes needed to be emotionally mapped out in advance. De Niro, however, was famously uninterested in over-rehearsing, especially when it came to the emotional dynamics of a relationship. He wanted to just let the cameras roll and see what happened naturally, recalled associate producer Barbara DeFina. These scenes, instead of being a harmonious fusion of talent, often turned into tense rehearsals that felt more like negotiations. Script supervisor Martha Pinson noted that planning sessions between the two actors often felt more like negotiations than collaborative preparation. Stone might ask to revisit a scene's emotional through line, while De Niro would respond by suggesting they just do a take and feel it out. Neither approach was wrong, but the lack of alignment made every shared scene a balancing act. Beyond specific scenes, their philosophical differences about character building created ongoing friction. Stone wanted to create a fully lived and emotional history between Ginger and Ace, an invisible layer of their performances that would deepen each glance. Every argument. De Niro preferred to keep things fluid and in the moment, believing that chemistry and emotional realism would emerge through repetition and immersion. To their credit, both actors remained deeply professional, never allowing the differences to explode into open conflict. But the emotional distance sometimes translated to screen, especially in scenes where Ginger and Ace's disconnect was key. In a strange way, the friction may have even worked in the film's favor, enhancing the authenticity of their unraveling relationship. Stone's intensity and De Niro's restraint played against each other in a way that made their on-screen dynamic more complex, more human. What do you think about the 6 actors that Sharon Stone hates? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye. Sharon Stone finally named 6 actors she hated most right here. Marty, Joe, Pesci, Jimmy. Oh, it was crazy. Plus all those crazy guys that play all the gangsters, you know. Sharon Stone just spoke up at age 67, finally breaking her silence. About 6 actors she hated working with. The Hollywood star, who's usually cool and classy, didn't hold back. She called one co-star a walking ego trip and another virtually impossible to work with. After staying quiet for years, she's now telling the truth about terrible times on movie sets and toxic personalities. Get ready. Some of the names she mentions will shock you. Billy Baldwin, the sexy thriller movie Sliver, was supposed to be hot and full of psychological tension and sexual intrigue. It needed the 2 main actors to be vulnerable and trust each other. But instead of creating passion, working together became a perfect example of 2 actors who had completely different levels of commitment to their work. Stone, who was still famous from Basic Instinct, put everything into playing Carly Norris with her usual intensity. For her, the role wasn't just about being sexy or creating suspense. It was like solving a psychological puzzle. She created detailed backstories, followed her character's emotions scene by scene, and tried to understand every twist in Carly's increasingly paranoid journey. She believed the film's voyeuristic themes needed raw, honest acting based on character truth, not just physical attraction or shallow drama. Billy Baldwin, on the other hand, seemed way more relaxed. Too relaxed in Stone's opinion. He played Zeke Hawkins, the mysterious tech-savvy neighbor, with a casual coolness that might have worked in a romantic drama. But it clashed with the darker, more emotionally heavy tone Stone believed the film needed. According to director Philip Noyce, who directed the movie, their different approaches became obvious almost right away. Sharon needed a scene partner who could match her emotional investment, he later told Empire magazine. But Billy often seemed more worried about how he looked than his performance. That disconnect quickly created problems on set, especially during the film's intimate scenes and its many tense voyeuristic sequences. Stone saw these moments as windows into Carly's unraveling mind. Each scene was a clue to her descent into fear and obsession. She wanted to explore motivations, analyze hidden meanings, and rehearse emotional beats. Baldwin, however, didn't like her need for detailed preparation. He often brushed off her scene work suggestions as too much. Their biggest fights happened during rehearsals for the film's more psychologically loaded sequences, moments when Carly's sense of safety falls apart under the weight of being watched and manipulated. Stone insisted on tracing her character's psychological journey through each revelation. She saw the thriller's voyeurism not just as a plot device, but as a comment on intimacy and control. Baldwin, on the other hand, seemed uninterested in such layers. Production designer Peter Jameson remembered Stone's efforts to bring Baldwin into character discussions. She tried to get him involved in serious talks about motivation and background, but he clearly found it boring and unnecessary. This creative mismatch affected their on-screen chemistry. What should have been a simmering, suspenseful dynamic between two complicated characters too often felt one-sided. Stone struggled to build emotional connections with a scene partner she saw as unengaged. She was used to working with people who pushed her, challenged her, or at least respected the craft. With Baldwin, she hit a wall of indifference that left her adrift in many scenes. Script consultant Joe Esterhaus, who also wrote the screenplay, saw the strain firsthand. He noted that Stone's frustration with Baldwin's laid-back work style began to affect her own process. She had to change her preparation methods, scaling back her deep-dive rehearsals just to keep peace on set. The compromise took a toll. The precision and intensity that had defined her performances up to that point were harder to maintain under these conditions. Sylvester Stallone, the pairing of Sharon Stone and Sylvester Stallone in 1994's The Specialist was marketed as an explosive mix of sex appeal and action star power. On paper, it had all the ingredients of a steamy blockbuster: espionage, explosions, and two of Hollywood's biggest names. But behind the scenes, their collaboration was anything but smooth. What came out instead was a perfect example of completely incompatible creative philosophies. Stone, riding high on her post-Basic Instinct fame, arrived on set with the carefulness of a seasoned performer. She came armed with character journals, emotional backstories, and layers of psychological detail for her role as Mae Monroe, a woman on a mission of revenge. For Stone, preparation was non-negotiable. Every scene had to be rooted in emotional truth. Every line had to make sense within her character's internal logic. It was the only way she knew how to work, and she expected the same level of intensity from her co-star. Stallone, by contrast, brought with him a completely different set of tools, developed not in theater, but in the high-energy world of the Rocky and Rambo movies. His acting style was instinctual, shaped by experience rather than formal training. For him, performance was about momentum, rhythm, and efficiency. He believed in trusting his gut and letting the physicality of the scene carry the emotion. Stallone wasn't interested in hours of discussion about emotional subtext. He wanted to hit his marks, deliver the lines, and move on to the next explosion. Director Luis Loza quickly realized he was mediating between two actors who were effectively speaking different creative languages. Sharon would spend hours discussing character motivation and emotional subtext, while Sly wanted to focus on the action beats and getting the stunts right. Loza later told Variety, while both actors were professionals in their own right, their different methods created a jarring disconnect that echoed through nearly every scene they shared. The tension came to a head during the film's romantic scenes, which were meant to provide the emotional core of the story. For Stone, these moments demanded vulnerability and psychological depth, a chance to explore her character's trauma and desire for revenge through intimate connection. Stallone, however, viewed the romantic scenes as narrative bridges to the next action sequence. His goal was to get the scene done, while Stone insisted on analyzing every line, gesture, and emotional beat. Script supervisor Maria Gonzalez remembered the friction clearly. Sharon questioned every line reading, wanting to understand the psychological foundations, while Sly just wanted to nail the scene and move on to the explosions. The difference in work ethic and rhythm created daily friction. It wasn't that Stallone was lazy. He simply approached the craft from a different angle, one that prioritized pacing over preparation. Stone's frustration grew. For her, the lack of mutual commitment to character development felt like a breach of artistic respect. According to costume designer May Ruth, Stone once remarked, "It's hard to connect with actors who phone in performances rather than fully live their roles." While she never publicly named Stallone, the implication was clear. Stone saw herself as someone who carried the torch for meaningful storytelling, while her co-star, in her eyes, was merely coasting on charisma and legacy. Years later, Stone offered a candid reflection on the experience. Respecting the craft means showing up prepared, not just showing up. It was a subtle, yet cutting criticism of what she saw as a recurring problem in big-budget films. A tolerance for minimal artistic effort in favor of spectacle. James Woods Sharon. Stone's collaborations with James Woods were anything but ordinary. Their shared screen time across multiple projects didn't just produce memorable performances. It created a storm of intellectual intensity, an ongoing battle of wits that both elevated and strained every production they touched.